Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to end today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's selection comes out as from Eliza. This time I'll be requesting The Presence of Goddess by Obscure Sphinx. I have no idea what any of this is. Obscure Sphinx is a band that I have never even heard in passing. All I know is, according to their description, they're from Warsaw, Poland. So, let's dive into this and see what The Presence of Goddess is by Obscure Sphinx. Obscure Sphinx. That's what I said. Anyways, let's dig into this. Love the presence of the drums. Really great dynamic work on the drumming as well. Lots of different velocities, different attack strengths. Very ominous. I'm curious where they're going to take me. Really interesting, the different vibes we get from the two guitars, which are both panned differently. So one guitar is kind of eerie, working with textures, the other one lays down chords, and our bass provides a groove. Getting a tom line very similar to our intro. Yeah, okay. Really interesting given this asymmetrical weight to the rhythm. Because like up to that point it's been very straight doom, very rigid. That loosened up a bit. Yeah. So we have groove and texture on our left side, and a very slow moving counter melody on our right. Tons of really cool rhythmic shifts in the drums, like even just on a ornamental level. Also, I'm waiting for another one of those screams, because I think that was a whistle scream, which is pretty cool. Oh, a little bit of a fermata there. Or what's that? Interestingly here, our guitars are kind of lining up. Yeah. We're starting to deviate again, but we're still working towards the same product right now, which is a unified, cohesive theme, atmosphere. Yeah, I'm really digging these grooves. A lot of reverence right here. A lot of the song's been weighty, and this is starting to kind of let loose. The gravity is releasing. I thought they were going to do a dual vocal line, but falling into this harmony was such a good surprise. No left guitar right now. Starting to fade back in. Yeah, introducing these eighth note ideas in our last bar with that 5-hit pocket and the bass kick. Really great way to transition into this. song's very transformative. Every time I think I have a read on what it's doing, it goes somewhere completely different. It's been a long time since we've had vocals too. Yeah, the build up to our final large section. The chanting underneath, yes. Yep. Pulling that dotted eighth line back that we saw somewhere close to the beginning. This is really cool because we're hearing quite a few lines that we've already heard before, overlaid in combinations we haven't. There's also 4 guitar lines here. This was actually the bass line from our last section, so that's neat. An octave up with reverb, but it's still the bass line. Where does this take place in the album? Also, how old's the album? Yeah, that is... The song isn't exactly one that is quickly moving. But that outro was even more so beyond that. So this was their 2013 release, which was 4 albums ago. They had a 2021, a 2020, 2016 before that. So yeah, they put out an album every 2 to 3 years, um, until we get to the double album, Thaumaturgy 1 and 2, which is where we get our 2020, 2021 back to back. So if they're still working together, we probably have another year or two ahead of us before we see a new album from them. And where does this take place? Oh, this is the album closer. Okay. Okay. Interestingly, they label this as alt metal, experimental, sludge, and post. And one of our reviews of it says sludgy post metal. Is that what this is? Oh man, all three of these of the top reviews, 4, 5, 6, looks like almost 7 of our top 10, 12, 11, 12. Anyways, a vast majority of these reviews have listed Presence of Goddess as their favorite track. That's... wow. And it's a good song. Okay, so going back to the idea though, sludgy post metal, I kind of got like proggy doom out of this. And honestly, these metal subgenres are still, I'm still not like super informed about them. I usually base them off of other things, and this reminds me of other doom bands, but with more of a proggier side to it. But maybe that proggier side is sort of some of the sludge. Sludge metal is something I have very, very little experience with and don't have any analogies to compare to. We did Sludge Band. I think we did Sludge Week, didn't we? And I don't think I walked away from that with a solid understanding of what it was, or a archetypal band that I can point to, or an archetypal song that I can point to and say, okay, this is my reference for sludge. I don't think that happened. Maybe we didn't do sludge metal week either, which is always a possibility. We are on week 153, 154. I'm gonna forget a few. We did do Sludge Week, and it was 122. So that was May of last year. Um, we checked out ISIS. I should have a strong reference for that genre, but I don't. And if you asked me to describe this, like I said, sludge would never come to mind. Doom is the primary influence I feel here. This has nothing to do with like an analysis of the track or anything. I'm just kind of speaking my mind at the moment. Um, because genres fascinate me. Like, okay, we can get into an argument that they're not necessary, they don't do anything. And yes, I completely agree with all of that. All art should stand on its own. But language, it's easier to converse with somebody if we can classify things, right? We need order for language and discussion to be quickly observed, right? Otherwise, we're going to spend 70% of a conversation figuring out what we want to talk about, and then like 30% is actually talking about it. Um, so genre is just a really nice way to package things up into order so they can be discussed in a reasonable amount of time. So it's not important that I think that this is doom or that it might be sludge or that it has post elements to it, even though I didn't really feel much posty about it at all. Um, but I do think it's interesting to bring up because I'm trying to learn. Because learning means I can talk about this stuff faster. Anyways, let's get into what the song is doing, though, which is a lot. I had used the word transformative earlier in the reaction, and closer to the end, I said every time I tried to get a read on it, it ended up doing something different. The first time this happened was like 5 minutes into the track, and up to that point, to me, I described it as such during the reaction. It was very doomy, very rigid, slow moving, heavy hitting, with these ethereal vocals over top. In a lot of ways, it reminded me of Zapata for many of the same reasons that I enjoy their music. And with that said, I am going to be checking out more of Obscure Sphinx. This feels right up my alley for where I'm at right now. I would probably never have gravitated towards this before starting the channel. But somewhere in the last 2 years, female led Doom has just really clicked with me. And if this isn't Doom, maybe I need to explore Sludge. Because this is kind of fitting into a lot of the reasons why I like Doom. And you know, I think it kind of started with Oceans of Slumber. I think that was one of the first Doom bands y'all recommended me that clicked. And from there, I've just been trying to capture whatever worked for me with that band. And that led me to Zapata and now Obscure Sphinx. This is cool. I like this journey I'm on. Anyways, though, really rigid, slow moving, very texture based playing with the her vocals on top of everything, which, when everything is so gritty and grounded and weighty, and you just have this range up top, it doesn't matter who's providing these vocals or if they even are vocals. You can have a violin line up top or a flute or whatever. It's going to create this contrast that I think is just always going to work for me, because it's like, what are you doing there? The rest of the band is down here. They're providing this power, and you're just contrasting that completely, and it's gorgeous. And like, I don't know what you're doing. You broke free from the rest of the band. What are you going to do with this dichotomy? Where are you going to take me with this? And I think that's what's really interesting about the vocal work here, is that they don't always stay up there. In fact, there was a bunch of pitch jumping in just like the first stanza. We started out kind of low, and then we like rose up. We went like super high for a little bit, held out a couple of notes, and we kind of hit a medium point, and it was just like jumping all around. And I love those pitch skips. Um, just shows a phenomenal control over the instrument, over the vocals. But also creates interesting vocal lines. And this is something we don't talk about too often on the channel, primarily because not a vocal coach, but also because we don't really dig too much into specificity of melody and how to craft one. We usually talk about what the melody is doing, not so much of how they achieved what it's doing. But a lot of the time, especially when we look at mainstream melodies, which is primarily going to be vocal work in pop, rock, um, some R&B, which I guess, is that pop? Is R&B even a thing anymore? um, anyways, there's a lot of times where we kind of sit around a note and we just kind of play around it. And if we're going to go up or down in pitch, we find a way to climb up or fall down. We don't usually jump. There's very few vocalists who have this feeling within them to just go somewhere and teleport there pitch wise. And we hear a lot of it here, and I really love it. It's an underutilized technique, and it can get bonkers if utilized too frequently or too often in a song. I think there's just a really nice balance here between interconnected lines and jumping to different pitches. Um, just yeah, uh, great melody writing is what I wanted to say for that. We have this though on top of textures. The bass is just kind of holding down some bass tones. We had some texture work in our right guitar and sorry, our left guitar, and our right guitar had like a chord progression going on or something like that, but it was all very slow moving, very rigid, very serious. The most flexibility we had was in the vocal work. Once again, distancing itself from the rest of the bands. But about the 4 minute mark, something happened. Prior to this, we had seen some movement. It wasn't all rigid. We had eighth notes. In fact, our opening had a bunch of different rhythmic techniques across the snare, tom, and cymbals, which I don't know if I'm going to have time to get into every single cool moment of here. We're already at 30 minutes almost for this video, but if I have time, I got to remember to touch on the intro that the drums did in the intro because that was just phenomenal. Um, but we have these eighth note movements, we have quarter notes. A lot of the times we are emphasizing the downbeats, but we have other things going on in here as well. But something happens around here, and it starts in the bass kick, I think, and it kind of gets a jazzy swung concept. I don't think it was swung eighth notes in particular, but we did have asymmetrical weighting to a rhythm. What I mean by that is when we talk about quarter notes, in whatever tempo this is, it is rigid. Every accent is on the beat. Bop, bop. If we do 2 hits per beat, it's still a rigidity. These are eighth notes in that same tempo. It's still rigid, it's still symmetrical, it's even. But if we divide it up into an arrhythmic, or sorry, an asymmetric style, for instance, swung eighth notes in jazz, we still have 2 hits per beat, but it's not symmetrically divided anymore. And that's what happens here. And it creates a groove. We have an unaccented beat that isn't exactly between both of our downbeats, and we have an accented beat on the downbeat, which is creating groove. It's creating a kind of a dancey rhythm where the rest of it might have made you want to nod your head along with it. This made me want to move my whole body. It created an energy, a momentum to the song that wasn't there prior. And we didn't achieve it by speeding up the tempo. We didn't achieve it by playing faster. We achieved it by introducing a new rhythm. And then the bass picked up on this and started getting real funky with it. I don't know what the bass was doing in the first section as far as how they were creating the sound, but in the second, it almost sounds like we're moving towards an entirely finger-based performance that occasionally utilizes, um, what is it? Popping. Where you grab the string, pull off, and release, and you get this really chunky sound to it. It's not used a lot, but it is used a little bit in between what sounds to me as more traditional, I'd say finger picking, just because it is a rounder sound than using a pick. But yeah, you get these really fat pops in between some of this other softer sound production. So this gets picked up by kind of everything. It kind of starts in the bass kick and is infectious and spreads throughout the band. And we move into something that is still lethargic in a lot of ways, but not exclusively. It feels like it wants to move, it wants to go somewhere. There is a new, renewed energy within. And we explore this in a couple of ways before bringing the vocals back in. I think it's interesting also right before this, I think, is when we had the choir and things were starting to sound epic. Maybe that all has something to do with each other. I don't know. Interestingly, we kind of calmed things down somewhere in the middle. I think it was like 7 minutes in or something. We calmed things down and we explored some new soundscapes. We had, I think, a fermata in there. I had called that out. If you don't know, fermata is just a temporary slowing down of the tempo before returning back to where you were at. You might have heard this in songs where they kind of slow down and hold a very important note out before going right back to the original speed. That's typically going to be a fermata. And I think we had that here, but I kind of second guessed myself because the tempo we landed on afterwards felt just a hair slower than the tempo before the drastic pause. And I'm not entirely sure. So we either had a fermata or we had some sort of retardando to bring the tempo down a bit. Because it was a quick fermata. It's not like we sat on the note for a while. It's just things seemed to drag, then they picked up a little bit, but I don't know if we picked up all the way. Um, and there were a lot of changes in here texture-wise. We'll go over that in a little bit when we explore the guitar work. But more importantly, like I was talking about, is this concept of growth. We return back to the stagnation of the doom, of really working with these rigid functions. Um, and we explore this pretty fully, going through a few different styles, introducing different types of rhythms throughout what I think is the bridge of the track before landing in our big moment, the build up into the chanting and bringing the vocals back, and finally into our outro. It feels like this song constantly dances between a sort of traditional rigidity and a sort of fluid freedom achieved by something. I don't know. And dances back and forth between us. It almost feels like a the rigidity of tradition versus the freedom of individuality, and dancing between the two of those, which is just like a bizarre concept for me to even think about. I don't know. We'll dig into the lyrics later and see if that's found anywhere in there. It's called The Presence of Goddess, so I'm going to assume not, but that's the vibe I got out of it. Um, and this is going to take us into, what I kind of alluded to there, which is the guitar work. And this is interesting. We have two guitars and a bass. The bass frequently just does bass metal stuff, which sits around the pedal tone and just kind of fills out the low end of the track. There are a couple of really funky rhythmic sections where it takes over, and there is one lead melody that it gets that it reprises in our final chorus, I think, that the guitar ends up taking over for our outro. But aside from those two isolated moments of melody and funky rhythm, a lot of it is just kind of sitting on the low end and just kind of filling that space in. I couldn't discern if it was walking a bass line. It all felt like it was all relatively in the same range, so I wouldn't say it was necessarily doing a walking bass line bit. Um, but I'm not sure if it was just sitting on a single pedal tone either. That was all centered though. Our left guitar frequently gave us textures, but not exclusively. Our left guitar was completely absent at one time and gave us a melody at one time, which is interesting that it changes roles around. But primarily, our left guitarist is fixated on textures, all sorts of different sounds, uh, done through pedals, done through playing. This guitar also did slides and bends mixed with sounds, I'm going to assume, to create very interesting um, noises, even. On paper, it would just be like take 1 note and change it, 2 steps. but like the way that they go about doing this with all their effects and everything is really interesting. And so we get all these bizarre sounds out of this that, at least to me, sound like they come from a guitar, but I couldn't tell you how they're made, which is fascinating. On the other end of the spectrum, our right guitarist does a lot of chordal and melodic stuff. A lot of suspended tones through a lot of this that usually run counterpoint to what the vocals are doing or what the bass is doing, and is less fixated on changing its sound for every section and more fixated on changing what it's playing. Not so much how it sounds, but when you put all of this together, we have really strong rhythmic components that are occasionally matched by the bass and occasionally matched by the texture bass guitar, while also providing different sounds for each of these sections so that no section of the song really sounds similar to the ones that come after it, even if they might be following some sort of structural pattern where we revisit something. I mentioned that I think that the big bombastic ending is our final chorus, and I had a question mark at the final chorus because I think those lyrics were repeated from something we heard earlier, but musically, no, I don't think we've had anything that was repetitive in that direction throughout this track. So I don't know if we have something like a chorus that would take us throughout, even though I heard repeated lyrics. The music is wholly linear, but what's really neat about this linearity, I mentioned that each of the sections has their own identity, soundscape to them, based on how the drums and the three instruments all kind of craft different sounds for them. But what's really cool is that not everything we hear is fresh. Well, I should say brand new. There is a lot of reusing of ideas in new contexts. I pointed this out heavily at the end where we had a bass line we had heard before with this bending sound. It's like wow, wow. Very cool sound. That's one of those weird texture things I was talking about that our left guitarist does. That was actually being played by both guitars. It was on both sides. There was a third melody guitar that we had heard quietly played on the right side before, now center channel above everything. And there was some chordal stuff going on from one of the guitars that we had heard before as well. None of these ideas had been played together though. This is the most clear section, the most clear example of this type of layering, but it had been happening throughout the entire song. I think about the halfway point, we had heard a majority of these individual elements already. Most of what we heard after it was different pairings of them, putting them in different contexts. It really is a song that is based off of 10 or 11 ideas and giving those ideas to different instruments or playing them in the context of a different idea or stacking them differently and stuff like that. And that's what allows the song to feel extremely cohesive from start to finish. There isn't a part in this where I'm like, oh, this sounds different, whether it's production or chords or emotion or atmosphere or anything. Like all of it kind of feels very similar. It all goes hand in hand, but there's such a distinction between each of these sections as well. And that's because a lot of the building blocks are similar across the entire song. It's just different combinations of them that are being utilized. Yeah, this video is getting lengthy. Transitions were fantastic. I had pointed out one of them where we went from a quarter note idea to constant eighth notes in the bass kick, and I had pointed out that we started that like a bar early. We brought the eighth note kick in like a pocket of 5 or 6 as part of the drum fill to introduce this new idea. The bass line at the time continued on what it was doing, and halfway through this new section incorporated an older bass line into what they were doing now. So again, recontextualizing the layers, but it helped with the transition because we never changed the bass idea. So we had that familiar ground between the two sections. Just like everything in here is so perfectly tied together that it feels so seamless and interconnected. And it's the big ideas, right, of how they went about crafting this with the building blocks, but it's the small ideas on transitions too, of how can we cleanly and effortlessly move into this next section without having this rigid, this is what we were doing then, now we're doing something else, that marker. How can we avoid that? How can we make it feel seamless? And I think it's a combination of those two things throughout. Um, just a fascinating track. I guess I will touch on the drum intro real quick. Just the evolution of it, right? So it starts out with toms, and first of all, I love the presence of it. They're over here, they're over there, they're kind of like moving everywhere. And the cool thing is that I think they're all every instrument, like each tom is panned individually. They have their own panning. The snare has its own panning. But it's not done so in a traditional route, which would either be from the perspective of the listener, where the snare would be on the right and the toms would be to the left, or the perspective of the drummer, where the toms are on the left and the snares are to the snares to the left and the drums are to the right. It doesn't seem to be done that way. The high tom is panned hard left, the low tom is panned hard right, the snare is in the middle. So, if it is produced according to the perspective of somebody to the drum kit is set up in a bonkers way. Well, I say bonkers, and it's weird to me, but it's just atypical. Um, but it has a very unique there's a very unique feel to it just because of how and where these instruments are panned, but there's a ton of dynamic work to it. It's not just soft and hard hit, there's a lot of variation between. And so we get this really complex dynamic play out of it. And then we shift from just low stuff to introducing some snare. We get a little bit of that higher bit. We slowly introduce a couple of cymbals here and there, and then we slowly fade out, or I should say phase out the drum playing and go exclusively to cymbals. And what's really neat is that you can hear this gradual shift from the lower end to the higher end of the drums, but you can also feel a difference in performance. The rhythms that the drummer used on the snare and toms are very different than the rhythms they used on the cymbals, and I can only imagine at that point in between when they're kind of utilizing both basically the whole kit at the same time, how they have to swap between these two sets of rhythms while also paying attention to their dynamic work. Like, it is just a phenomenal. I really want to see a drummer react to just that opening and really give some more detailed stuff, because I'm coming at it from a composer and a listener. I'm not a drummer. So I can only imagine, being in the mind of a drummer and having to pay attention to all of this nuance. But the end result was just phenomenal. And that nuance is felt throughout this track. It really is. We don't really see a lot of dynamic work throughout, but there's so many little pieces, and like we go through so many different feelings from that doomy weight to groove to epicness. There was one part I said it felt like reverence, I think it was, where all the weightiness was gone and we were like just lifting off the ground now. All the baggage on our shoulders is gone and we can just float and it feels so great. There's transformative soundscapes, like it's there's so many little changes to sounds to craft drastically different emotions throughout this, and it's just phenomenal. I'm gonna hit some lyrics. I think there were a lot of them, so take me a second to read these and we'll wrap this video up. There were not a lot of lyrics. There must be a ton of repetition. Like I mentioned when we got to the end of this, I was like, oh, it's been a while since the vocals have been in play. And that was true, but I'd say even out of our 15 minutes of music, there are probably still 8, 9 minutes of vocals collectively. They just either repeated a lot of this or took their time. But anyways, it seems that these people put a ritual together to bring a goddess to them. It says the shadows gathered, whispering with twisted, deformed lips, who talk no more, no eyes to see, no ears to hear, condemnation. So they can't see, they can't hear, and now their lips talk no more. So three of their sights have been removed from them. It is very possible that through this ritual of summoning the goddess, they have to give up um, one of their senses. The eyes and ears have already been removed, and on this third ritual, they have lost their ability to speak. That part never gets repeated, but the rest of the song is pure repetition. We have what I think is the chorus. I think these were the words at the end, and we also heard them somewhere like in the 5 minute mark, and it was, I think this was during the reverence section, but I've really got to go back and listen. I mean, we're talking, I'm half an hour away from having heard the song now, but it was also incredibly dense. The presence of goddess, reborn in flesh, bathe in wine, with tearing grin, forces the heart to worship her as goddess, puts her merciless arms around, clings with bloody nails, finds its way to the heart. So, this goddess. So, there is a sort of ritual here. I missed this word earlier, or at least I might have just glossed over it. Reborn in flesh. This isn't about asking for the goddess to simply exist in front of you. It really is a ritual to bring her into our reality. To be reborn in flesh. That tells me that it's not just being born into flesh. This has been done before. She has been brought from her deity realm to the physical plane before, which reinforces my idea that they might have to lose, one of their senses every time they summon her. Um, but I get the idea. Reborn in flesh, bathed in wine, with a tearing grin that forces the heart to worship her. Um, there is something about her presence. It could be an aura she puts off, it could just be her sheer beauty, that just gazing upon her, you fall into her whims, and through that, she takes your life. I assume. She puts her arms around you with bloody nails that find their way to your heart. That gets replaced a couple of times, or sorry, gets repeated a couple of times throughout the song, if I recall correctly. The next thing says, I feel your grace in my body, I feel your grace in my gutter. And the I feel your grace, it will be better is repeated over and over and over, which I think is interesting because first we had in my body and then in my gutter, and then we kind of combine the two and we get the ter from the end of gutter, but the b from the beginning of body. We kind of combine body and gutter to get better. I feel your grace, it will be better. And there's definitely reverence in this line. I don't know if this was specifically spoken during one of those uplifting, ethereal moments, but yeah, this song is just wild. That's pretty much my read on the lyrics. Is it's a ritual to summon the goddess, and then the feelings, the emotions of being in her presence, possibly having your life taken. Like I said, the whole thing about bloody nails finding their way to the heart can be taken literal, but can also be taken a bit more metaphorically. And just that she has her tendrils in everybody's heart, which a lot of people can relate the heart to sort of the other side of the gut, right? Where your gut is your initial instinct and your heart is more of your emotional response to things. She might be able to control where your heart is at and have you make decisions you wouldn't normally. That kind of vibe, right? So a metaphorical, having nails inside your heart. But yeah, I don't know if this is a malevolent force or not. Definitely a controlling one, regardless of the reading. Um, but there's a lot of mystery around it. And I think it's really neat that the music kind of goes through so many moments that now at the end, I'm like, okay, I got a pretty good read of it. But in the middle of the track, I was like, where is this going? What are they going to do next? What's the next soundscape they're going to utilize? And there's a lot of mystery around the song as I was listening to it, which I think is present in the lyrics as well. I don't really know anything about this god that they've summoned, but I'm interested. What's going on? Is this a concept album? Can I more explore this world and this lore through the rest of the lyrics? I want to. Man, those are my thoughts. 51 minutes. Those are my thoughts on Obscure Phoenix's The Presence of Goddess. I like how it's not the presence of the goddess. It is a proper name, just like the Christian God. You don't say the God or a God. You just say God. So this is The Presence of Goddess. Proper name. Very cool. What did you think? Did you enjoy it? Anything that stood out to you? Anything you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Help me out on the whole sludge doom thing? Let me know. Put that stuff down in the comments section. Above the comments is a description box, and in there's a link for Linktree. Takes you to this menu. It has links for everything related to the channel. You can find links to my music. You can find links to the Discord server. You can find multiple ways to support the channel and so much more. I put a ton of stuff in there. Go ahead and check it out. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Greatly appreciate all three. We'll be back tomorrow. We're going to continue on with our exploration of the band Nothing. We just checked out Get Well off of their debut album. We're going to look at something off of their latest album and see how they contrast and compare. And we'll also do a special selection tomorrow, which is just, I say that like it's different, but that's what we always do. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.